Hello and welcome to In Vivo Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Layli Saragiani, and today I'm joined by Steven Duan. He's an experienced change manager with a strong background in financial services and organizational effectiveness. He has years of experience leading change, driving adoption, empowering leaders. He has helped organizations navigate transformation successfully. Now, what we're going to do is dive into how leaders can show up effectively in change management, because leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about impacting people and guiding them through uncertainty. So let's go ahead and get started. Steven, welcome to In Vivo Leadership Podcast. I am so excited to have you here. Can you tell our listeners what it is that you do?
Sure. Yeah. Glad to be here, Layli. Thanks for the invite. So I'm in organizational change management, have been in this space for probably a good 7 or 8 years. Main responsibilities essentially are just to make sure that with the organizations that I have supported in the past and current, making sure employees are ready for big or small initiatives, making sure that they feel like they have proper resources at their disposal, make sure that they're kept up to speed as changes are coming from up top. We want to make sure there's a clear sync between what leadership expects as far as delivery of those initiatives versus what employee capabilities, and matching those and making sure if we have sort of a gap, with that, making sure that there's proper education, proper training, proper communications to ensure employee readiness, so that anytime we go live with any of these initiatives, it's optimal for both the end user and for the organization as a whole.
How did you get into this role?
Mhm. Yeah, I think funny enough, didn't really ever have that kind of background. I think at the time when I first got into change management, was a fairly new concept for the organization I was with at the time. And I think the reason I got into that particular role was because my role at that time, I was kind of entrenched. I had been in that space for a while, and they were looking for individuals that came from that department or that area because they were trying to build out a more organizational wide structure that took into account the needs of that core population, right? And so again, this organization that I previously worked for never really had that capability, never really had that kind of leadership in place. And so they were at the time kind of trying to find individuals that were very much tenured in their roles, but also had a good perspective of sort of like that macro perspective of what would benefit the whole, more than just sort of the individual work that they had been accustomed to from a day-to-day perspective. So I think based on a length of time in that position and some of the opportunities that came about while I was in that role, had some mix of experiences on big projects, small projects, and then also the day-to-day responsibilities of that role. And they really wanted me to kind of represent the voice of that particular customer base.
What's been the most interesting part of change management for you?
Really put yourself in the shoes of a lot of different stakeholders. I think when you're able to understand concerns and bridge that gap between what employees feel sometimes may be a disconnect between them and leadership up top, you also start to learn a little bit more about how people think about things, rationalize things, how to appeal to maybe some of the concerns that they have, and also try to bring a different perspective to the table. And I think that's kind of rewarding because you're sitting in a unique position of being able to be the middleman between leadership and big employee bases. It's a crucial function. It's an important function, but I don't think you can overstate the importance of the role itself.
What's been the most challenging piece?
I would say probably the one that stands out to me is not all leadership thinks the same way, right? Not all leadership behaves the same way. I think at times we have a tendency to think that our managers above them, executive leadership have all the answers, that they've considered all the pros and cons of a decision. just by nature of maybe of their role or their rank or their title, there is sort of a divide, right, between the general population and them. And so you always look to them maybe to have all the answers, and working a lot directly with a lot of these leaders and leadership, you realize very quickly that's not the case. And you also realize that many times they're looking to you for guidance, right? They're looking for you to kind of fill in the blanks for them. And so I think as you kind of work around, and go around to different organizations and are able to understand more of the leadership structure and the hierarchies, the more you realize there is no one answer and one size fits all. Everything is a unique case. Everything has a different solution. Everything has a different answer. And, your responsibility is to make sure you get to the best outcome and the best overall objective with those things in mind.
I like that answer because you are customizing to the needs of the culture, to the needs of the organization a lot of the time. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, you always have to, right? And just because you have a lot of experience, maybe within this field or within this, the role itself, you can't carry over one experience from one organization or one experience from one role necessarily to another, right? Everything is, you have to into it with an open mind. You have to consider all the different variables at play, whether it's people, whether it's processes, whether it's procedures. No two things are alike. And even though there's a standard format and a way that we kind of put together our plans, I think all of the inputs to those plans always have to be from scratch. You can't have something that's a placeholder.
So, how can we as leaders make sure that we're really listening to our people,
Mhm.
especially during the times of change, rather than just pushing forward with a set plan that we have on our minds?
Yep. So funny enough, lately, I think it was yesterday, I was talking to one of my teammates, and he had actually shared with me an article from Gartner. And Gartner does a lot of research in organizations, people, mindsets. One of the things that they talked about in this article was about the importance of leadership and why, effective leadership works, why not effective leadership doesn't work. And it kind of drills down into four key things that all leaders need to provide. So, hope, a sense of hope,
Mm.
trust, compassion, and stability. And I'll kind of keep referring to these four things because as I was reading it and digesting the article, that is very emblematic of what puts us at ease, right? If you're ever talking to your manager, if you're ever talking to a skip level leader, what makes you feel the most comfortable is a combination or maybe all of these things combined: hope, trust, compassion, stability. When you remove any of those aspects or any of those categories out of that, that's, I think, a lot of times when things can fall through the cracks and things can kind of slip. And so, to your question about how leaders can ensure that their teams are effective, that teams are listening to them during times of change, I think one of the most crucial things as part of that also is to understand through those four tenets, understand and know the needs of your people, right? Everything that a leader does affects the people that they lead. And the best leaders, I think, act with their people in mind.
Mm.
If you're talking about a leader that tries to emulate maybe other leaders that they admire or are the ones that have set the tone for them in the past, that's when some trouble, I think, will potentially happen, right? Because I think a lot of people try to figure out their weaknesses. They try to develop themselves based on their weaknesses instead of maybe focusing directly and maximizing their strengths.
Mm.
So I think what a really great leader has in common with each other is truly knowing their own strengths and knowing how to call on those right strengths at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Your your explanation reminds me of when I had received a big branch to run, and one of my leaders had come and watched me and shadowed me for the first week that I was there, and had shared, okay, we need a dominant, aggressive person to be part of this team and lead this team. Can you do that? And I remember thinking, like, there's no way. That's not me. That's not who I am. And I called my mentor that day and I said, this is the feedback that I got. What can you tell me? And I'll never forget it till this day. I always remember that. And it really connects with what you're sharing, which is just be yourself. You don't need to be someone else to run this branch. You are there for a reason. You are there for your strengths and your purpose and your authenticity. So you give that authenticity. You don't need to be any of that. So I actually kind of negated the leaders that came in and sat with me, and I used that and just was authentic in my leadership, and it really helped me. So it completely resonates with me. And I want to ask you this question because there are common mistakes we make as leaders. As perfect as we want to be, that's just not something that we are. So what are some common mistakes that leaders make when they're managing any change, and how can they shift that approach to be more people-centered?
Again, referring back to these tenets that we talked about earlier, I think one of the key things in regards to this question is a matter of trust, right? We look to leaders, we look to those that are higher up, in the hierarchy, not only to make the key decisions, but to have our best interests in mind, right? I think we all start out that way with that sort of baseline assumption and that hope almost that that is the case. I don't think that's the case in every scenario or every situation, right? I think you're going to have a mix of those that stand out, great leaders that no matter where else you go in your career, no matter what else you do, you're always going to think of those few leaders that have made a huge impact, right? And then conversely, you've got situations where, if a leader does not take the time to play an active role in developing and embodying that sort of personal connection that they need with their people, right? Understanding again the needs of their people, but also by doing that, tying in that trust component with their people. Employees that have that trust with their manager, with their leaders, are always going to be loyal to that particular individual. And then as a result, any hard conversation, any hard change that comes about is going to be significantly mitigated with that trust inherently built in. But that's not an overnight process. That's not something that, as you touched on before, the word authentic, you can't create that out of thin air and you can't rush that process. It's through shared experiences, right? Shared situation, shared conflict, how you resolve those and get through them that ultimately is what stands in the end, right? And is what allows an employee to feel like they will go to war with their particular leader. And even if there are decisions from up top that maybe don't resonate particularly well with a particular employee, knowing that their managers are looking out for them, are, taking their concerns up, and creating that transparency with leadership, taking their feedback into account. Those are all crucial things to ensure that change is managed effectively. And I think that's a common mistake a lot of leaders have or make is they don't go through that process. They don't invest the time to not only listen, but actively work on the feedback that they get from employees, right? So I definitely think it's something that inherent in terms of good leadership is making sure that they have a good pulse on their people.
How do you handle resistance to change, especially when people feel like they have no control over what's happening?
So this is definitely a hard subject, right? And this is the one thing that I think everybody in this space, in this change management space, is always trying to solve. The more you can get in front of a particular change, the more that you can bring people along, the more that you can over communicate, the more that you can just, keep tying this particular change to something that resonates with somebody, right? I think the with them, right? The what's in it for me is a very key core concept within change management. And I think it directly applies here. Always finding that other angle, that next angle. And I don't mean to say angle in a derogatory way. I just mean it to say, don't look at a particular challenge or a problem just with one lens.
Mhm.
Look at it and consider a whole host of things and perspectives that you need to take into account when you think about what if I were in this employee's shoes? What would he or she be worried about? What would he or she be concerned about with regards to news of this change? I think you start there, you think about it, and you kind of map out everything that could be of concern, big or small, and you work your way through that. I think too often the reason why there's resistance to change is because people feel like they're just being told to do something or they're just being directed to do something. And maybe leaders feel like, yeah, I've already done the over communication part. I've stressed it in my team meetings. I've said it as much as I could say it and it's not resonating. Well, the reason it's not resonating is because you're not finding that common connection point with your person, right? And you're not understanding because maybe you haven't made that personal connection as we talked about earlier. You're not understanding all the factors that go into somebody's thought process when something, again, a big or small change is thrown on them, right? I think the human mind is very complex. There's a lot of things, even in our day to day, that may not directly relate to each other, but because of how we feel about a particular life situation, a particular environment, a particular change, maybe in your own personal life, that directly correlates and feeds into your work life, right? And I think leadership really needs to build that personal connection, right? And understand all of those factors as they're helping their people through change.
As you're describing this, I think I go back to the four words that you mentioned, which was hope,
Mhm.
trust, compassion, and can you remind me the fourth one?
Yep. It's hope, trust, compassion, and stability.
Stability. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like a four-legged stool, and if one of them is missing, that resistance happens, right? I can't sit on a three-legged because there's one still piece
Yeah.
that's missing. And that is just so powerful for us to know as leaders because is how much empathy matters in what we do when it comes to change.
Yeah. 100%. I think, and I know this probably is not a new concept, but again, with regards to change, you're dealing with the human mind, right? You're dealing with things that aren't necessarily predicated based on right or wrong. It's all based on emotion. It's all based on how you feel about a certain thing. So there is no sort of set thing that you can apply directly. And again, we talked about this earlier. It's a unique situation for every person, every organization, every particular problem that you're trying to solve. So everything needs to be diagnosed with, I think, that in mind, with sort of the emotional aspects of change, understanding the human mind, right? And how we respond to change. I think if you asked anybody, think about a time in your life when you had to go through a big change, everybody would have something that they could say, right? And they could tell you and express to you how it felt to them. But it's not something that maybe you can directly feel. Like you're never going to experience it in the same way that that particular individual does because of so many different factors. So what, good leaders I think try to do is as much as they can try to make sure that they understand as much of that back history and that backstory as possible with that emotional connection, right? And with that personal touch, make sure that that person doesn't feel as if it's just another thing that they have to do, right?
Yeah.
Like if a leader shows that this matters as much to them as it does to their employee or to their person,
Mhm.
I think that's already a winning combination right there to start off with.
Everything you're saying is so true and it sits with me. And then there's also this devil's advocate part of me that I feel everything all the time.
Mhm.
And I get so burned. It's just, I'm burnt out. I am so burnt out. I get so good at this, and people come to me as a leader and start throwing things at me, and I just want to fall apart. So, how can leaders that are like myself, that are supporting their teams emotionally during a major transition, not take that burden with them and survive all of that feeling and all of the emotions that are coming at them?
It's tough, right? Like we talk about leaders in this way. Again, we talk about them in a way of they have to wear so many hats, and they're not only are they responsible for their own people, but they have to play the middleman role between them and their leaders, right? And higher up leadership. And I think the higher up you go, the more it adds to that sort of challenge and that complexity. I think the first thing that we should make sure leaders do or think about is like you have to know yourself well first. And we spoke earlier about sort of knowing your innate strengths, and investing in those strengths, right? So anything that based on experience, based on people that have given you feedback, anything that you can tap into as your key innate strength, definitely run with that, right? And build on that and keep enhancing that. I think again, a lot of times leaders focus too much on the weaknesses aspect because we're very much a strength and weaknesses kind of society, right? And in the especially in the work environment, we're always focused on those. And anything that's considered a weakness, consider, doing this, taking this course, building on this, developing your skills here. Leaders are very pressed for time, right? So I think a lot of times they just feel stressed out because they have to work on themselves as much as they have to work on developing their people and answering to higher up leadership. So I think first is learning, confirming, investing in your own innate strengths. Know what the demands and expectations are attached to that particular leadership role.
Mhm.
And then just make sure that that's something that's very clear in terms of maybe their conversations with their leaders of these are areas that I need support in, right? We need coalition of support. We need help in this area because here are my key strengths and I'm not ashamed to state them, and I'm very confident that I can portray this particular image or particular sense of calm and rationale, to my people because I have these strengths, but this is kind of where I need assistance and I need help, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing to enlist other peers at that level to help with regards to some of the challenges or providing extra context to some of these transitions without having that feeling of I'm taking on this burden all on my own, because everybody needs a support system. Everybody needs, to feel as if they have somebody they can turn to in times of challenge and conflict. So making sure you have that kind of structure in place, I think that would probably be my suggestion, based on the things that I've seen in a lot of different, organizations and a lot of different areas is again, investing in your own strengths, making sure that you capitalize on those strengths, but where you feel like you need support, making sure you can enlist that team behind you to help you get through those difficult times.
And what you're sharing is really developing your emotional intelligence so that
Mhm.
you can start to pick up the cues. There's actually a really great article I read with the book Harvard Business Review for 2025. They were talking about empathy and how in the work world we are burdening ourselves because we don't know how to practice this fully well. And I'm butchering the article, so I want my listeners to know that I know I'm butchering it, and I would really push them to look at this article. It's in the book 2025 that Harvard Business Review has 10 articles that are very important, plus a bonus one. It talks about the different types of practice of empathy. One is completely emotional based, and the other one's action based. And they're saying we as leaders really spend way too much time on the emotional piece. That's where we get burdened and burnt out, versus the empath piece with orientation being involved. So, for instance, if Stephen, you come to me and you're telling me you're not happy with your job, you're fed up, and what I'm picking up is your emotions, and I'm, oh my God, Stephen, I feel for you, what can I do for you? What needs to happen is the empath piece that I'm bringing as a leader should take an actionable step rather than sit in that emotion, that puddle of emotion, and just taking that action. So if Steven isn't happy, let me look at his, performance. How has he done? What is his future goal? What's the end that we have for him? Let's start to approach this from a step-by-step process and put that into action. I'm less likely to be burnt out than being stuck in that feeling sense. And that goes right into your thought, which is that emotional intelligence needs to be there for me to have that level of self-awareness to not go to the left and go to the right with the empath action. So spot on, Stephen. Thank you. Is there anything you would recommend from a change management perspective for our leaders today?
Ooh, yeah, that's I know there's lots of resources, there's lots of articles, lots of books out there that folks can definitely get up to speed on, and if they want to, like you mentioned, build their emotional intelligence, there's plenty of people smarter than I there. I think to me the most important thing though is still to make sure that a leader sees the greatness in their people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a quote, and I think I'm going to pull this, and hopefully I don't pull it too out of context, but I think it's from Maya Angelou. And it talks about a leader sees greatness in other people. He or she can't be much of a leader if all they see are themselves. And so if I'm thinking about that kind of symbolizing everything we just kind of talked about, which is, a leader builds up their people. They play this role that's very, very difficult because, it's not about them, right? Their success is predicated on how their team performs. The only way to do that is to drop any sort of ego. And this kind of goes into servant leadership. I think a lot of people talk about servant leadership, but it's another thing to be actionable about it, as you referenced as well, right? And so how do you translate all of, what you want your team to be with the challenges that they have into actionable steps? I think the first step is to make sure that you always keep them in mind and not have any sort of personal goals override any of what you see in your team, because your team is going to feed off of you. Your team is going to feed off of your energy. They're going to feed off of your solutions. Any of what you tell them is sort of what they're going to go based off of, right? And so as long as you keep them in mind, and as long as you keep not only their needs, but celebrate them when the time calls for celebrating them, right? Pick them up when they need to be picked up, but make sure you have that bond with them. I think a lot of other things will fall into place when they feel like there is that investment, not necessarily in them as employees, but as people. Make sure you keep them top of mind. You see their potential, see their greatness. And I think the best mark of a great leader is what you do with that and how you bring up future leaders and where your people go, maybe even long after, they've left you as a manager, right?
Beautifully said, and a great way to end our time together. Steven, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on LinkedIn, so definitely add me if you'd like to connect. Don't have all the answers. I think just working in the space just like everybody else is, but I think the more we can build a community of the kind of people in our field that do the kind of work that we do, share those challenges and those perspectives, I think it just builds a stronger and better case for this line of work going forward.
Change is a big part of our world and today, especially with the world of AI and where we're going with it. So we have to embrace it. We don't have any other choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Agreed.
Thanks, Steven. We'll speak soon.
Yep.